Ancient Egypt, a land and time best known for great pharaohs and awe-inspiring structures. This grand civilization ran its 3,000-year course before the Western world we know today had even made a start. In this video, we take a look at just a few of the ancient Egyptian practices and traditions that have been fascinating historians all over the world. Mummification was a tradition reserved for only the wealthy and elite of the time. While cheap options for embalming and burial were available to the poorer members of society, the deluxe pharaoh edition kind of mummification was a really expensive and time-consuming process. So why do it? Why shell out a fortune to keep your likeness preserved for thousands of years? Well, besides that, the belief was that if the body retained a recognizably human form, it was possible to live again after death. The Egyptians also believed that the ka, which is one part of an Egyptian soul and spelled Ka, was sustained through food and drink. For this reason, such offerings were regularly presented to the dead, especially during the Feast of the Valley, an annual festival of death and renewal, where many families would spend the night in the tomb chapels of their ancestors, drinking and feasting by flickering torchlight, as the living celebrated their reunion with the dead. Ancient Egyptian law could be described as being somewhat progressive in that it treated men and women as equals. Both genders could own, earn, buy, sell, and inherit property. In practice among the general society, though, well, everyone was expected to marry, and husbands and wives were allocated their complementary but opposite roles within the marriage. The wife was made responsible for all internal domestic affairs, such as raising children and running the household, and the husband played the external wage-earning role. So gender equality right there. Technically, if maybe not socially. Between 2686 BC and 1650 BC, most pharaohs built pyramid tombs to house their mummies during their journey to the afterlife. But by the start of 1550 BC, pyramid building just wasn't really the in thing anymore. Egyptian kings were choosing instead to be buried in hidden rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings, while a highly visible memorial temple, situated on the border between cultivated land and the sterile desert, would serve as the focus of the royal mortuary cult. It was once thought that the Great Pyramids were built by 100,000 slaves, the idea being well reinforced by dramatic Hollywood dramatizations. But archaeological evidence indicates that, actually, these great structures were built by a workforce of around 5,000 permanent and salaried employees, and up to 20,000 temporary workers, all of whom were free men. The work was usually done in 3 or 4 month stints, and the builders would stay in temporary camps near the building site. Payments were received in the form of food, drink, medical attention, and a promise of decent burial in the nearby cemetery for those who died on duty. Ramses II, better known as Ramses the Great, is often considered the greatest pharaoh of the Egyptian Empire. So much so that 9 more pharaohs took the name Ramses in his honor. He ruled over Egypt for 66 years until his death at age 90. He fathered over 90 children, outliving many of them, and had 8 great royal wives, and at least some 100 or so concubines. Analysis of Ramses' mummified corpse showed that he had red hair, which was associated with the Egyptian god Set or Seth, the god of storms, desert, chaos, and war. One of the most important fashion accessories in ancient Egypt was wigs. The reasoning for this was, perhaps unusually, actually a practical one, because both men and women would shave their heads in an attempt to keep cool in the hot desert climate, as well as to avoid lice. Wigs also indicated social status, as rich people wore wigs made from human hair, while poor people wore wigs made from wool or vegetable fiber. Legend has it that King Menes was the first pharaoh and first human ruler of Egypt, and that his kingship was given to him by the falcon-headed god Horus himself. Menes's rule, speculated to have lasted some 60 years, saw him bring about the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, sometime between 3100 BC and 3000 BC. Having brought these two lands together, he then built their new capital city and named it Memphis, which means the balance of two lands. Proper timekeeping. The ancient Egyptians were the first people to develop a calendar with a year consisting of 365 days divided into 12 months, much like the one we use. They were also one of the first cultures to keep the time of day, using things like sundials and shadow clocks and merkets, which are devices used to measure the movement of the stars at night. The need for these innovations was spawned from the desire for a system to predict when the Nile would flood, so that the growing and harvesting of crops could be planned. They did not ride camels. Contrary to popular belief, camels were not often used in ancient Egypt, not until the very tail end of the dynastic age. Instead, the river Nile made for a convenient and obvious means of transport for the Egyptians. It did and does, after all, flow right through the very center of their fertile lands, and was linked to settlements, quarries, and building sites through the construction of canals.